Welcome back to the Rhetoric Warriors podcast, where we are teaching the world some rhetorical defense systems. It's like the Star Wars defense systems. We're just shooting down unethical rhetoric from the skies. Complicated times require sophisticated techniques, so you might as well get some. I'm Dr. Dan, rhetoric PhD, escaped professor, stand-up late-night comedy writer from Hollywood, founder of Rhetoric Warriors. I'm spreading some education out in the world, trying to do some mental rearrangement, or I don't know, just give some people some of the stuff that I learned way back when. The podcast, I talk to comedians. We do three things. I talk to comedians about their careers in politics, because that's usually fun. I convert conservatives because they worry me, and I think they need some talking to. So that's interesting. And I talk to people who are actively in the field doing some form of persuasion pros, social issue activists, politicians, and of course, more rhetoricians on this podcast than any other podcast in the world. That's an unverified claim, and I'm staying with it. So this week is another episode of the Rhetorician Files. My guest this week is a rhetoric professor at Texas A&M, a place I know well. I used to be married to one of those people. She is the author of Demagogue for President, the rhetorical genius of Donald Trump. And she's got a 25-page vita, so I've got plenty of things I could talk to her about. Welcome, Jennifer mare-chia.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I got that right, mare-chia?
You totally got it right.
Wow, that's...
Cha-cha-cha-chia.
I'm from Kentucky, so that's almost a miracle that I got that right. I mispronounced everything. So, Texas A&M, you've been there a while, huh?
Yeah, it's my only academic appointment. I've been here since 2003.
Wow, that's a run.
Yeah, it might be my only one. They just promoted me to full professor, so I probably won't leave.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the golden quicksand, right? Not quite gold, but yeah.
Yes.
I was a professor off and on. Like I had 2 full-time appointments at Cal State Fullerton and a little college called Peace College in Raleigh, North Carolina. But I was never really an academic scholar. I like the intellectual side of it, but that kind of writing, my brain just balks.
Yeah, it's kind of like a bait and switch because grad school is so much fun. You get to, read books that you're interested in and sit around a table and talk to people about it. It's like a, perpetual reading group or whatever. And then, you have to go get a job eventually, and that's not as fun. I found.
I have a friend, what's his name? William something. Anyway, he's a rhetorician, and we talked for a while at the University of Louisville together, and we were walking around one of the neighborhoods, and they have all these beautiful brownstones in these neighborhoods there. And I'm like, just look at this block. If every house on this block had somebody cool that you knew living in it, like another professor, or they did this or whatever, you'd never have to go anywhere. Your life would be completely full. But it never works out that way.
That's right. That's right. We live not far from campus, and we feel like our street's kind of like that. And I'm sure it's like that in Austin, actually. You got cool people everywhere.
Yeah, but it's spread out. It's like everything else. Like as the city gets more and more filled with people, it just squishes out. So you never know who's on your street. And
yeah, we definitely know our neighbors, and they're all awesome people.
Cool.
Can attest.
It sounds like you're winning. You're winning the professor game.
I'm winning today.
So tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into rhetoric, and why rhetoric. And
yeah, so originally I was a broadcasting major as an undergrad, and I worked in radio and TV a little bit. I was a featured extra in a movie once.
Hey.
And I really, I wanted to do news reporting. I wanted to find out the truth and tell it to people and make the world a better place. And what I found is that I was, when I was working in radio, I was sitting in a room by myself and talking to myself and pushing a button every 4 minutes, which wasn't...
Welcome to big time media.
Yeah, it wasn't that. It wasn't great. And then when I was working in Sacramento at a major, network affiliate, and we were rewriting video news releases and rewriting the morning local newspaper stories, and it was just about taking press releases and creating news stories out of them, and it wasn't what I had hoped it would be, and I'm pretty idealistic, so I decided not to do that, and so I decided to get a master's, and I thought I'll study political communication, and maybe I'll go work on political campaigns. Maybe I'll be a speech teacher, because I had gone to community college and had been on the speech team there, and then where I ended up transferring to. And so that was a big part of my life then. And I worked on some political campaigns in California. And the first one was cool. We raised the minimum wage. And I thought that was, important. And then the second one was not. It was,
You lowered the minimum wage.
yeah, we didn't do that, but it was, I'm not a sports person, but it was about a sports stadium, and so there was a big referendum to get a bunch of money to build, I think it was Candlestick Park, to build a new Candlestick Park. And the argument was so bad. It was like, the Bay is rising. And because the Bay is rising, the grass is not, draining on the field. And this is a danger for our players. Now, we have just switched from artificial turf to natural grass. And so what we need to do is have, some ridiculous amount of money, $100 million or something, to build a new stadium in the parking lot of the old stadium.
Oh.
Because the Bay isn't rising there. And it was so bad, and it won, and whatever, people probably were going to vote for it anyway, but it was so embarrassing to have to make those bad arguments that I decided I might try to get a PhD and stay in school and not work on political campaigns. And so then I did that, and I became very interested in studying democracy. And so my interest in rhetoric is really an interest in democracy, and which is sort of, explains why I wanted to write a book about demagogues and demagoguery and Donald Trump, because it's anti-democratic. And it sort of has led into my current project, which is about propaganda and ubiquitous propaganda, why we've all learned to communicate as propagandists primarily instead of as citizens, and why that's anti-democratic. So
Yeah, there seems to be plenty for you to study about this topic.
there's a lot for that.
It's fascinating to me. Like I said, I am an escaped professor. I was never really politics. I did more of the rhetoric of entertainment, and I studied films and pop culture, and eventually ended up teaching screenwriting and being a TV writer, because that sort of story is what interests me. But when Trump came along and appeared on the scene like a rhetorical Viking, with just slashing and breaking everything, and the entire political scene having no idea what to do with essentially just a reality show entertainer. I mean, that's all reality show narrative is just cause problems that are fast, that end, and everybody can go on to the next thing when you cause another problem. But they had no, like, that entertainment rhetoric crashing into politics, zero defenses over here. They did not know what to do, and they still don't know what to do.
That's exactly right. That's a great analysis of it. One of the things that I write in the conclusion of my book is that, Trump is like P.T. Barnum in being able to attract our attention. And actually, you might know him because he's from Austin, or he was at Austin for a while. Jonathan Tyleb, who used to be the head political writer for the Austin Statesman, who just retired. He wrote a blurb for the back, and he uses the phrase that I describe Trump as an authoritarian P.T. Barnum.
Mhm.
And And that's what your description reminded me of. I would love to take credit for that phrase, but I didn't write that. But I use it all the time. Trump is absolutely an authoritarian, P.T. Barnum.
Yeah, that's a
He's
nice little.
so good at it. And you're absolutely right. The media didn't know, the press did not know, and still does not know how to handle that. He broke the media. That's what Jay Rosen said, his goal was. And absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the promoter thing, I wrote a series of blog posts that I end up pulling down so I can kind of collect it as a book. But the things that Trump did, his rhetorical techniques sort of across the board, like if you look at his history and his training, he's just importing his training and like his promoter training from business, the fact that he was a self-promoter. And if you go back and listen to some of his early business interviews, they're exactly the same as what he was doing as president.
Yeah.
Overclaims, bombast, attack the interviewer, allow no space and no air in the room. Very promoter like techniques that I've seen forever from entertainment types who are, again, like P.T. Barnum, blowing everything up so big that maybe it can raise up above all the other stories and get some notice.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Trump is not a good businessman, but he is a good marketer. And he marketed himself, his brand, and the "Make America Great Again" ideology very successfully. And one of the stories that I tell in that book is about the Trump University scam and how it worked. And in doing that research, I was able to read the Trump University manuals, playbooks, and they were very similar to the things that I was writing about, in terms of Trump's rhetorical strategies. You mentioned using hyperbole, attacking the interviewer, all that kind of stuff. But other things too, like one of the things that they suggested is that you use like, "I noticed about you," right? So like that you're paying so much attention to you, the potential stooge basically of the scam. Oh, I noticed that you were really nodding and paying attention. Oh, I noticed that that you're taking notes. I can tell you're going to really be a success here at Trump University. All of this kind of stuff. And it's just another ad populum appeal, right? Praising the wisdom of the crowd, in order to sort of seduce them into your trap.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think about the viability of, I mean, rhetoric has this 2,500-year tradition, and especially when you talk about the democratic tradition and rhetoric, it gives you a certain language to work with, a certain terminology apparatus. And I've been interviewing David Payne, who was my dissertation director years and years ago, quite a bit on the Rhetorician Files. And we've talked about some of the terminological apparatus and the prison house of language type stuff. That does rhetoric have enough in it to be imported over and still keep that tradition of like the democratic talk? Like he was talking about de Tocqueville and sort of all that sort of democratic rhetoric that we've inherited, kind of. Nobody's learning it anymore. But does it, is it too archaic to handle like this postmodern, Trump mixing all these different worlds together? Like, what do you think?
Yeah. I got a lot of thoughts on that. I think it depends on how that language or that education is deployed, like anything. Academic language isn't going to help anybody do anything in the public sphere.
It'll
And
get you
so
published.
yeah, but no one will read it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can publish in academic journals and such, but it's never going to be read by the public. And the language that's used is so obtuse and specialized that, it's not designed for the public. Um, and so that's something that I actually really try to fight against in my research. So this Trump book, was published with an academic press, but it's not written for academics and it's not written that way. And so every time I use a academic term, I even though, the reader has seen it, 50 times at this point and certainly knows the definition, I still put in parentheses the like common sense words, for what it
Right.
is. So, one of the things that I write about is the way that Trump uses paralipsis, which is an ancient rhetorical term that means, to leave to the side. And so the modern way of understanding it is I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Right. And so everybody loves that. Everybody loves, I'm not saying, I'm just saying. They're interested in how that works, how irony works, how it allows you to say two things at once, how, you can't hold someone accountable because they're not really saying the thing that they're saying, how it provides, a backstage view where you think what the person really thinks because they're telling you, the secret god awful truth that they wouldn't say and they know they shouldn't say. And aren't they really a truth teller for saying it? And aren't they a hero? There's a lot there.
Hmm.
There's a lot of ways that you can amplify conspiracy theory and all of that. All of those stories are so fascinating, and people are interested in it. But, if I was to publish an academic article on paralipsis, no one's going to care, and it's not going to reach the audience that I would like to reach, which is regular folks who are interested and care.
Yeah, and that's my same project with Rhetoric Warriors. Like,
Yeah,
how do you
clearly.
harvest from this massive trove of work, even academics in the last 20 years, just the amount of papers and studies and books and
Yeah.
lectures and conversations. It's just inestimable. Inestimable cannot be
Yes.
estimated.
Cannot.
How do you go in and pull something like paralipsis, which is this tiny little rhetoric technique floating around in that
Yeah.
world, and go, hey, look how cool this is, and make that actionable and useful for people?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll tell you that. So I originally got into the Trump business, or the Trump criticism business, I should say, because of the New York Times. In November of 2015, they were doing an analysis of his language. They wanted me to participate in sort of a week-long project with them where I would watch his rally, speeches and his interviews and look at his tweets and such, and then let them know if I saw any evidence of demagoguery, and if so, what I saw. And so I did that, and in watching him over that week, I saw him repeatedly do, 6 things, and so I had the interview and I told them, the 6 rhetorical strategies, the ancient Greek and the Latin things, and why he used them and how it worked, and what he was doing. And, at the end, they included a couple of quotations from me, but they didn't focus on my terms. They had their
Hmm.
own sort of framework for understanding him. And, um, I don't think any of them got, none of the rhetoric terms got into the thing. Um, and that ended up being my book, right? Like those 6 terms are the things that I saw him repeatedly do over the course of the campaign. And I got a chance to explain it to people. Um, but yeah, I mean, initially there was some interest, but really there wasn't,
Right.
there wasn't interest in explaining the rhetorical strategies or using the terms. Um, and so I was really excited that I got to do that, for the book. But yeah, I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to help people to see what we can see. When you look at Trump for a week, you're going to see the same things that I'm going to see because we have similar training. But most people can't see that. They can hear, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, or praising the wisdom of the crowd or whatever. But they don't know. They don't know the terms. They don't know why it's meaningful. They don't know the research. That
Right.
explains it all. So I don't know. It's cool to be able to do that, to translate it.
Yeah, and I find people do have a fascination with it. There's a gap, cavern, chasm between their fascination.
Lacuna.
Huh?
A lacuna.
Oh, that's a what's that word?
It means a gap chasm.
Huh? In Maltese or
Oh,
no?
lacuna. Look it up.
Okay, I've never heard of it.
I try to
So,
sneak it into all of my work. It's one of my favorite
how
words.
do you spell it?
Laucuna. Maybe it's not AU.
All right, I'll
LA.
find it. So over here, you've got the fascination. You can hook people with this stuff. I've
Yeah.
made a living in the last 5 years in marketing and business. I never worked for business until I moved back to Austin to raise my kids, and I couldn't work in entertainment anymore, and I couldn't take education, academics anymore. So I pivoted and started selling consulting and marketing to business. And you can hook people with, like, even tell them, like, I have all sorts of lures. I was going to name my consulting business Lure Incorporated. Like, I can lure you in, like, just telling you that there are dark arts of rhetoric that are being used out there, and Trump knows
Yeah,
them, and
he
he's using
does.
them on you. And unless you learn the white arts of rhetoric to counter them, you're going to lose. And so you can get people fascinated with it. The lacuna in between that and getting them to learn the rhetoric so that they can use it is vast. Like,
Yeah,
people check out so quickly because it's really hard to consumptionize rhetoric as an information source. It's a pretty
yeah,
complicated tool.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and maybe Trump and, the rise of authoritarianism, maybe that will motivate people to want to study it more. Maybe not. But he is,
A little.
just a little. He's such a good example of, you know, why why we should study rhetoric,
Sure.
to protect ourselves from people who use language to deceive us and to manipulate. And who are really good at it. I mean, if you talk to a political scientist, or at least if you did talk to one before Donald Trump became president, about the possibility of a demagogue running for president in the United States, they would say it's impossible, right? They would say that the system is designed to prevent that. That the constitutional apparatus, that the party system, the party apparatus, that the media would provide a check on any potential demagogue and winnow them out.
Mhm.
Right. And like you said, Trump broke all of that. He broke all of those barriers. No one was able to hold him accountable or prevent him from taking power. And, if you turn to a rhetorician, they would say that that's always the danger, right? That's why we study rhetoric, um, is so that we can understand how these strategies work and how someone like Donald Trump can be a demagogue, can be an unaccountable leader, using language successfully to do that. And, that's a blind spot that they would have had that we didn't have. But
Yeah, and it's fascinating with Trump, the collision of Trump, which his techniques are not hard to, they're not hard to lay out. You can see them. They're very
no.
simple. He's very simple in what he does. But the collision with that, with the rise of digital social, the phenomenon of being able to directly deliver those messages to people with no filter, no
Yeah.
gatekeeper, in this 3 feet space is incredible. Like, when they turned him off Twitter, it felt like the entire country fell silent. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, all the loudspeakers that have been blaring are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. He took up a lot of space, in the public sphere. And so that's one of the things that I try to explain, is that he used language to attack the nation, by attacking our public sphere. And it, my work on demagoguery sort of merged with another straight of research that I do, which is on the rhetorical presidency and presidential rhetoric. Um, and
Well,
Trump
there's
was
Rod
never.
Hard for you. There's a
Exactly. Yeah, I told you he's been a mentor for me. Trump was never a president. He was always a demagogue, and he never used presidential rhetoric. He used demagoguery, and he said, that he didn't want to be presidential. He thought being presidential was boring,
sure,
um,
and he's right.
and
In the
yeah,
entertainment sphere, it's boring.
yeah, it's
Like, unless you're
boring.
going to put it clear and present danger, put it on Air Force One with terrorists coming after him, by definition in entertainment world, it's boring.
Yeah, and Biden is boring. He wants to be boring.
Yeah.
Biden was a gaffe machine, like he still is. And if he talked more, we would be, outraged maybe by all of his mistakes that he would make. But he's just like, zip it. I'm gonna
Yeah.
be presidential.
The discipline he showed, like even when Trump, in that second to the last debate, or did it turn out to be the last debate, I guess, was just pushing his buttons. And the worst thing he said was, you know, shut this clown down. Like
Yeah,
clown was the worst he got out of him. That's pretty
yeah.
good. That's pretty good discipline.
It is. It is. But so it's actually fascinating that Trump's been deplatformed in terms of the rhetorical presidency and the history between the press and the president, because what it means is that Donald Trump has less rhetorical power as an ex-president than any president since William Howard Taft. Right? Because what happened is the rhetorical presidency emerges with Woodrow Wilson, and he's the first president to really use communicating directly to the people
Wasn't he Mr.
as,
White Supremacist? Didn't he
yeah,
reframe the KKK and everything else?
yeah, he did that. And he
Thanks,
also,
Woodrow.
yeah, he also rewrote the Constitution by going over the heads of Congress and speaking directly to the people. Primarily before that, the president used intra governmental communication. Most of the speeches of the president were, to other bodies of government. And Congress was supposed to be the sort of forefront of the national political imagination. And so Wilson changed that by using new media at the time, so radio, phonographic records, that kind of thing, to speak directly to the people, to get the people to put pressure on Congress to enact Wilson's agenda. And that recentered our view of government to the presidency. And from Wilson to about George W. Bush, you had this essentially cooperative relationship between the press and the president, where the president gave the press access and information, and the press provided a platform to
Right.
connect their rhetoric, their policies to the people. With the emergence of new media around George W. Bush's presidency, the press became obsolete, right? Because the president no longer needed the press to be able to communicate directly to their supporters and to the people as a whole. And so what you saw with Donald Trump is really a continuation of something that George W. Bush did, that Barack Obama did, which is to say that he went over the heads of Congress and he went around the news filter to use social media to speak directly to his supporters. And he was very effective at it.
Yeah, the good things, if you look at, to me, like why Trump was successful, again, I tend to harvest from my experience in Hollywood and entertainment,
Sure.
like how they work things and how the production apparatus works there. And then once I got into marketing and promotion, I could see that as well. And I knew a lot of stuff from live event stand-up promoters too. But when you look at what Trump does, when you give him any like tiny opening, he just maximizes it.
Yeah.
And I don't think presidents, and I don't think politicians have been used to that type of maximization of every opportunity. To make sure you get emotion in it, to make sure you get conflict in it. Doesn't matter who it is. Every day has to have a new conflict in order to make it entertaining, which is, the core of most entertainment narrativity is conflict. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter whether it's true or nice or anything else. It's just, is it there? And so using that with that open platforming that you're talking about, yeah, it's a double barrel shotgun at that point.
Yeah. He took advantage of, the attention economy, and he took advantage of outrage, right, which drives attention. And he used attention and outrage to control the public sphere and to win the presidency. Nobody who has rhetorical training or who studies democratic stability or democratic deliberation or the public sphere, anything like that, would say that political discourse should be organized around attention and outrage.
Right.
Right, like those are not productive values for any of that. But that wasn't Donald Trump's agenda, right? He didn't care about democratic stability or democratic backsliding or erosion or productive public discourse or problem
Right.
solving or any of that. He cared about keeping our attention, and he was great at it, unfortunately.
Well, and that again is my thing about the traditions of rhetoric. In some ways, I think have held us back. Like we didn't believe like Trump could be done. And Trump is a once in a lifetime character. The
I
culture
hope so.
knew him for 40 years before he ran for president. He had
Hmm.
so much saturation. And then he got on, The Apprentice, and they turned him into a hero, glorified him in front of everybody for 10 years, #1 show on TV. That amount of exposure, nobody else has that. Like, who else is going to do that, especially on the nefarious side, like Trump, the anti-hero? Who else has that that could do it? I mean, now you're starting to like look around to harvest like from the Tom Hanks and maybe The Rock, Matthew McConaughey talking about running for governor, all these
Sure.
different things, but none of them are Trump.
Right. None of them are Trump. I've seen some people write that Tucker Carlson seems to occupy the same media space that Trump did. He's been very successful at agitating people in the mainstream media and on the left. Um, and so there's that. But I don't think Tucker Carlson
Yeah, but
is
where's he been a hero? Where's
exactly. Yeah, he's not exactly Trump.
Yeah, he's so mealy. I mean,
Fish sticks.
he's that kind of yeah. I think you can make people, even people like him. I think you could make them skin crawl about him with his little bow tie and that kind of stuff. So, do you take the next step, which there's documenting the unethical techniques of demagogues and propagandists. Do you offer counters?
No, I don't. A lot of people asked me to do that. I was really nervous as I was writing this book about about being accused of being political, right?
How dare you?
I know. Well, I am an academic, and it's an academic book, and people are very excited about attacking academics these days.
What?
So, yes, it's
You mean
true.
like since Reagan attacked all of academics, people are like, academics? Crazy.
Well, there are really organized campaigns about this. And so I was a little bit chicken, I have to admit.
Sure.
Um, but also, I convinced myself that it would be more democratic for me to point it out so that people could see what I see, make an argument, for why this is dangerous for democracy, and then, invite people to decide for themselves what they think they should do about it. Because, that sort of crossing the line into advocacy, I think, is where, you know, where I don't know, was like a bridge too far or something for me. Um, and also I wasn't really sure I had answers for how to stop Trump, and so yeah, so I tried to just sort of use democracy as my decision rule. And the last chapter in my book is about Trump using authoritarianism to appeal to his voters and his supporters, and why that worked for him. And the stuff that we've been seeing from polls about Trump supporters, and whether they prefer a strong leader, authoritarianism, or whether they prefer democracy, how committed they are to democratic values and democracy as a political system. Um, you know, they're not.
No,
um,
absolutely
it-
not.
they're really not. And so, um, I think democracy is something we have to fight for, and I hope people understand that.
So again, from my entertainment and creative side, creative comics always try to take what is and see if they can alter it to maybe what they want it to be, or at least whatever creative thing it could be. So democracy, you have this huge tradition of democracy, but it kind of got broken right from Gingrich and the obstructionists in Congress. And
Sure.
here, let's make sure government doesn't work. And now let's yell at everybody that government doesn't work. So they hate government. And therefore, government doesn't work. Like we've broken it. And do we need like some kind of democracy 2.0? Like it doesn't seem to be functioning in the modern digital environment very well.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. And we needed it before Gingrich. You know, he exploited norms in the same way that Trump exploits norms. And he broke, the consensus system in Washington. But so my first book is called Founding Fictions, and it's a history of the first two generations of Americans and how they argued over what kind of government they were going to have. If it's a government based on the will of the people, what's that called? And what can the people do? Points of stasis, right? What can the people do in a government based on the will of the people? And it's called Founding Fictions, right? So it's really about why we think we have a democracy when we don't, and how the founders were afraid of the people
Right.
and their dangerous opinions, and how they wanted to separate the government from the people as much as they possibly could.
Well, that was the rise of the Senate, right? The powerful Senate and all that kind of stuff about the republicanism within
Yeah.
a democracy,
Yeah,
basically.
every part of the Constitution is about protecting the government from the people, and also protecting the government from, a demagogue on one hand, or a king, or a cabal, right? Like they were terrified of power, of people having political power and using it improperly, but including the people, average citizens. And, so like a lot of people understand now that the Constitution was, profoundly anti-democratic because of slavery, and all of the, parts of the system that it had to accommodate that. But it was also always going to be profoundly anti-democratic. And so I wrote about that. I guess in 2010 that book came out. Um, and so that's never changed, right? So the last part of that book is I explain how Andrew Jackson, with the rise of democracy in America, sort of reimagined the term democracy so that it became something that people found more acceptable. But he did nothing to change the system of government that was always anti-democratic, so that it was always a légèrement, it was always a sleight of hand. That we called our government a democracy when it wasn't. So
Good for
yeah.
us. We're so good at using rhetoric. Look at us. We need some cover here to not have a democracy. I know. Let's call it a democracy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so what Jackson did was that he changed. He turned citizens into partisans, basically, and then called partisanship democracy.
Interesting. So,
We're there still.
this idea of history that you're using to draw context to the present, is that what you're doing?
I do that.
Yeah. Like an academic turn there. Little game that you're playing of, we can learn right now by looking at how this evolved. Yeah, again, how do you sell that to people? Like in the consumption culture and information is what I'm fighting right now or figuring out, right? Like even doing a podcast, I find fascinating the amount of information I can get into an hour of animated conversation. And I love, like conversation as learning, because it's easier to me. It's more dynamic. There's more
Yeah.
going on. I mean, it doesn't allow you to deep dive into the, hold on to the details and all that kind of stuff, because you just went through a huge area of, American history of Andrew Jackson, and you pulled out a nice conclusion from it, which I think people could clearly learn from. And they'll be out there going, "Who's Andrew Jackson? What?"
Andy Jack.
Andy Jack, Jack, that guy, the original Trump. All those pictures of the store, or the paintings, I guess, of his people, raising the White House, the original, horde in the White House. Pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, and Trump had a picture, a portrait of Jackson on the wall in the Oval Office. He
Yeah, he
loves
went through a
Jackson.
little stage where he was trying to appropriate that guy and imprint
Yeah.
him on himself.
And then he decided he was Lincoln.
Yeah. Well, he's better, he's better to all minorities than even Lincoln. That's the fascinating thing about Trump. I think when people really understand how unhinged you can make rhetoric and talk from truth. Like in the past, I think politicians only had so much leeway. Like if they went a little too far, everybody's like, hey, you're lying. He just shattered, those connections.
Yeah.
And when you get into that kind of, I don't know how much postmodern stuff you do, but like I start with, because I find it a very useful thing if I can get it a little bit into people's heads when I do the converting conservatives with smart people. I'm like very well educated people and try to think their way through it. I'm like, well, you're thinking in the simulacrum.
Yeah.
And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, it means there's something, here's the world over here, and here's you, and there's something always between you. And it wants to craft that experience. And it's called the simulation.
Yeah.
They're like, what? But it's one of those at least mind chiselers, like you can get it in there and pry people and stop them at least a little bit. And then you got to take them slowly through it. But it does at least get you to where they can have some meta perspective, which is where people like you can come into the breach and go, hey, now that you're thinking a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, so one thing that I did as I was writing my book is that because writing is lonely, right? Doing your academic stuff is.
I do it at parties. Like I invite people over and I just sit in the corner and write.
Yeah, well, so I would just do these threads, like I'm writing a section on this, and this is where I'm at, and here are a bunch of links, and kind of think out loud and write it in public. And I found that was really a great strategy for me because it attracted people to what I was doing. People had lots of great suggestions for things that I didn't know or hadn't read or whatever, and it made them sort of invested in the outcome, like they wanted to read the book when it came out. And one way, and this is, I swear, going to connect back to Baudrillard, is that I was writing a thread about Trump and the spectacle. And I took a bunch of stuff that I had cut from the conclusion of the book because it was just, my book was way too long. And and so many people like found the thread useful and engaged with it and, really interacted with the ideas of it, that I was like, well, but I cut this from my book. And they were like, no, put it back in. And so I did, I put it back in my book because, Twitter told me to. And yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Right? Like people want that. Like they didn't know about the Society of the Spectacle and Guy Debord, and they didn't know about what is true is what can sell, like the commodification of information in the way that the spectacle sells reality. They didn't know about Baudrillard, even if they've seen The Matrix, where Baudrillard was popularized a lot, at that time when The Matrix came out. They didn't know that stuff, and they certainly hadn't connected it to Trump, the way that you and I would.
Right.
And so what was obvious to me and was something that could clearly be cut was to them like, eye-opening. And so, yeah, I put that back in.
I spent the whole time I was going through academics, I was also running a stand-up career on the weekends and vacations and whenever I could. And so I learned, like, stand-up teaches you a ton about writing and creativity and information and audience and that kind of stuff. And it's such a close feedback loop. Like you can literally think of something that day and you're the whole production system. You're the director, the writer, the performer, the producer, all of it. And then you go up that night and do it for a real audience, and they tell you with incredible clarity, hey, that's good, that's terrible. And so you end up writing in a real feedback loop with the audience, as opposed
Yeah.
to like most writing and authorship, which is you imagining this audience that's going to get to at some point. And maybe you've got some readers here and there, but they're all giving you different perspectives. The audience in stand-up will give you a very cohesive, big response, and it's merciless.
That sounds frightening, but also really helpful and useful. One of the things, so Jay Rosen is a professor at NYU who has a blog called Press Think, and he's probably the nation's foremost critic of journalism and journalistic practice. And I mentioned him earlier when I said that, Trump's goal was to break the press. That's something that he said in 2016. And so he has a whole bunch of recommendations for how to rebuild trust between journalism and audiences. And one of the things that he says is, crowdsourcing, what topics should I cover? What is interesting to you? Like, what do you want me to ask this elected official? Like investigative practices that really involve the audience, writing in public, that kind of thing, so that people can see, the backstage, can see the process, and then learn to trust the process, which is also similar to what, someone like Robert Putnam, who wrote the book Bowling Alone, when he writes about the failure of public trust in the United States, he says, one of the things that he says is that it's partially due to the fact that we've withdrawn from, the public decision making. And
Right.
so we could trust the decision of the PTA or of the, of the local city council, because we participated in that. And so we saw what the process was like. And when we stopped doing that, these decisions would just emerge and we wouldn't know why or, how they were decided. And because of that, we lost a lot of trust in the process and in the body, the deliberative body itself. And so, I kind of selfishly did this when I was writing my book, just because I was lonely and I had a lot of, I had all these, I had all this stuff, I would be just intaking information and trying to organize it. And so, I found that making threads would help me to say very succinctly what I was thinking, and organize my thoughts in a way that, I could then go back to later and be like, what was I thinking? How was I going to write that? But it really did turn out to be a really good engagement strategy for writing the book, in building trust with an audience too.
So talk a little bit about your new book, The Propagandist, that we are all propagandists. Is that or
Yeah.
we've swallowed so much of it, it's like lead in the water. We don't even notice it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to write that. Yeah. So it's tentatively titled We the Propagandists. So like we the people. And it kind of picks up from that discussion that I was having with you earlier about Andrew Jackson turning us, from citizens into partisans. When I talked about that book and that research for a long time, people would say, and what are we today? And I'd be like, yeah, we're partisans still. We haven't changed. But I think we have now that when I got started writing, really writing the Trump book, I really got fascinated by propaganda, and I wanted to include more of that in the book, but it wasn't. I needed to stick to my 6 rhetorical terms because it was way too long. And so I've been teaching a class on propaganda and thinking about how to write this book, which I'm now working on. And yeah, what I think happened is, again, adding another layer of separation between the people and their dangerous opinions and democracy, like actual democracy, and, the way that people had new political power with social media and the ability to communicate. We had broadcast power all of a sudden. in a way that we never had prior to social media. And I think that what ended up happening is that we got turned into propagandists instead of using that political power to advance the cause of democracy. So all of the arguments that people made, at the beginning of the web about how it's going to be this democratic force, had this potential anyway to be this democratic force, that knowledge and information were going to be widespread and easily available. I think that what happened is that once again, they figured out a way to prevent us from using that power that we could have had for democracy, and instead channeled all of our democratic impulses into becoming propagandists.
Yeah, it's
It's
fascinating.
a happy story.
Well, think about it, though. This is the nature of democracy, uncontrolled participation. And so you have a public discourse, and I start a lot of my stuff sometimes with, think of the idea of the public discourse as a stream. Like it's literally a mountain stream, and it's pure and silver and nothing bad in there. And then you tell, 300 million people, you can put anything you want into that stream. And just what do you expect to happen? You still do have those things. You have great people in the public discourse stream who are giving out great information and free and awesome and insightful. And there's plenty there, plenty. But you also have all the misinformationists, all the propagandists, all the nefarious people who want to ruin that stream for their own purposes. And we don't protect that stream at all. It's not like we have a rhetorical guardian of the galaxy uh, tribe out there, like, hey, keep that out of the stream because it's dangerous. And everybody retreats back to this self-determination, this market, ideology of, hey, what, we don't control speech around here. I'm like,
Right.
well, once you open up a whole new access to the stream, guess what? You may need to do something different, some kind of control, because there's nothing now. And so there's no way public discourse is ever going to be pure and useful and clean. So what do? You just let the propagandists just dump all this stuff in there, and you train the people up so that they can recognize, oh, that's a tire floating down my stream. That's ugly. Or, or do you do some kind of protection? What are the creative solutions to keeping that stream viable?
Yeah. There's a lot of
Right?
smart people working on that. And and at the same time, I think everyone who's working on it realizes that it's basically impossible. Although there are lots of ideas, and some of them seem to work a little bit.
I don't know. I got terminated off YouTube.
Oh, did
Like
you?
for just interviews
Good
like
job.
this. And so I had to go back around their back doors and come in through their Twitter support team and be like, hey, I'm interviewing mostly professors about protecting the public from
Yeah.
anti-vax and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, what?
Why would you
I'm
do?
like, this is exactly what you want on your site. And so they finally reinstated me. But I tried to make the point to them, and like, even like go back to rhetoric, right? Like, how about ethos instead of trying to carve through the content, which you're never going to do, because now you're going down to terms, and they're basically terminating me, literally terminating me,
I get
because
it.
I'm interviewing somebody who's anti-vax and taking them through a conversion process. So I'm like, you
Right.
can't do that. So how about ethos? Like, maybe everybody, like, if you qualify, it's like speed pass at the airport, where you get a good stamp of approval and then they let you post whatever you want.
Yeah. Or maybe, the protections in 230, in the internet code will get adjusted. There'd be some accountability. But, I like your metaphor of this stream, and I think that it's really apt. But I think that one thing that's different today, that sort of separates the new propaganda from the old propaganda, is that the platforms, the stream itself is like calling for the people to put the tires in, right? And the
It
platforms
rewards them for it.
are rewarding the people for putting the tires in, and addicting people to putting the tires in, you know? And so you think you're doing the right thing because you get all the retweets and the recirculation of your content, and it juices the dopamine receptors in your
Right.
brain and all that. And I mean, like, how would you know that's wrong if you're getting rewarded by all of the mechanisms that are available? So it's pretty broken. It's pretty broken.
Well, it should
And
be, right? It's a brand new medium, a brand new distribution
yes,
platform. Nobody's ever dealt with this in all of human history. I
yeah,
explain it sometimes like social media is like you're trying to have a fight with one person in a boxing match, but there's a million people watching and anybody can jump into the ring and hit you in the back of the head at any time. Like, who has ever had a multi-log at that level where you're in that kind of communication from that many people that instantly? It's never happened.
no, no. And they give people the power to blow up the world with zero training about what's newsworthy or what is liable, or they don't teach us the things that like journalists learn, because they're being prepared for a profession where they're going to communicate to the public about public things. They don't give people training in that when they hand them a cell phone when they're 13 years old or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you saw this story, maybe you didn't because it's ridiculous, but about this 17-year-old kid, and now I can't remember his name, who tried to invite his high school to a party for his birthday this weekend in Huntington Beach. I think it's Adrian. So yeah, go read the New York Times today. Taylor Lorenz has a good article about this. But so the thing is that him and his buddy like made a digital flyer and they posted it on their channels. And somehow this thing got trending to such a degree that like 280 million people or something like that. That's ridiculous. It can't be that. But, some ridiculous amount of people, saw this thing and it trended all week. And people were like making TikToks about how they were flying to California to attend this party. They ended up having 2 days of police action in Huntington Beach, shutting down and arresting all these 17, 18, 19-year-olds for trying to attend a party that this kid was, just trying to have with his friends from school. It's that kind of thing, like, oopsie. And so he didn't end up even showing up to his party because he was afraid that he was going to get arrested for causing a riot. But he's also like acquired a manager in the meantime,
Sure.
like in the last few days since this thing happened. He's got some sponsorship deals. He's, palling around in the DMs with all the influencers. um, you know,
But it is, right? I mean, when you look,
that's where we're at.
but Baudrillard couldn't even have seen any of this. Like the
Mm.
pastiche experience of all of this now, the unconnectedness, the just crazy randomness of it, the flash into the air and then the precipitous fall. Like that guy's not going to be
Yeah.
anything in 3 months. He'll go down into this, and understanding that kind of as a culture, in a community itself is just bizarre. My son is 18 and he is making a living in Rocket League. I don't know if you know, it's an online multiplayer game.
Mm.
40 million people play it worldwide.
Wow.
And he got to be a little celebrity in it
Cool.
because he's a video editor and a special effects editor, self-taught from YouTube, and started getting hired to edit all the professional players' matches down to 5 minutes. He's really good at it because he knows he's been playing this game since he was 11, and so got really popular. And like a company hired him to they just pay him each month to not even talk about their company really, but they can put his stuff on their website. So he's getting influencer money. He's getting, video money, and it's all in that little universe that almost nobody's heard of, even though 40 million people around the world play this.
Right. Wow.
And how do you explain that? So here we are, traditional academics who came through book literary, traditions and writing, doing lectures. Come on. Like we're so dinosaurs that we're probably oil at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. How is that a job? Right? Like my dad, who worked in a car factory his whole life, he wouldn't recognize that as a job. And my brother makes video games and has done that since the 1980s. So he also doesn't understand how that's a job, even though we do. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is that that the reality of the internet and the way that it has changed, how information circulates, is amplified, becomes celebrity, all of that, it just completely messes with our ideal of reality, of work, of life, of what living is. And it's just to take it back to what you said about Trump earlier, and then, politics. And so you have someone like Trump who's like, I'm a liar. What's truth? Like it's,
prove it.
and he takes us to like a pre-Cartesian view, I know what I mean, of of what is truth, right? Where he's like, it's what I say it is. It's what I convince people to believe it is. Your facts don't matter to me. Facts.
Those are just punching bags.
Yeah. So, and then of course there's the whole, denial of expertise that comes with that. And, of course, all established leaders and academics and other kinds of experts are all corrupt. Right.
Well, they've got to cut all those out, right? If you're going to play appropriation, you're going to play masquerade, you're going to do all these, what I lay it out as the unethical playbook, like here are the unethical techniques that they're using, that the nefarious are using. And here's the ethical playbook. And they, they mix, but you can at least show it. You can at least show masqueradism. Like, hey, they are literally wearing a mask of somebody who they are not. And look at all the other things over here. Even with Trump, if you just lay out, business promoter. I do this with Fox News all the time. Like when I do a little bit of logic conversion on conservatives, which is not easy, but I'm like, well, Fox is not even an American company. Like it was founded by a foreign nation, with the Australian Rupert Murdoch, who got made a British citizen, and then Reagan made him an American citizen. Why would we let a foreign country create a fourth network inside of our country? If that was China or the Middle East, like if the color of that person had been wrong, would have never got in. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, they don't even know he's Australian, right?
Right.
So if you can get a little of their xenophobia on your side,
use it against them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have tried to talk about is the kind of Ciceronian cui bono, right? Who profits approach to debunking things, right? Which is to always sort of ask, who's winning if this happens, and who's losing. But at the same time, I worry a lot about cynicism. And so, the sort of fine line between critical thinking, asking who profits, and thinking that, cynically, that, everything is corrupt and everything, tu quoque, right? Which is appeal to hypocrisy. Everyone is a hypocrite. Every political figure, is a liar and is on the take. And, that kind of cynicism leads to Trump, at the same time. And so, that fine line between being hopeful and being critical,
Yeah.
it's hard to maintain both of that, both of those things simultaneously.
Comedy's useful for that.
Yeah.
Because I get to do this stuff with people. Like, they always want to challenge me. Well, what's your politics? Are you liberal? I'm like, of course I'm liberal. I'm a comedian. I need people to be relaxed and open and fun, and conservatives aren't. They're a terrible audience. So I just want to start the comedy party. Like, that's all I want, is just vote for the funniest people.
Right.
The comedians will take care of us.
That's right.
And they don't know how to respond to that, because they've never heard that before. So it gives you that ability to get the criticism in there, the actual thought in there, without it turning over to cynicism. Because I see a lot of people that I came from the paleo community for a long time, and they're all alternative thinkers, and they think they're libertarians and, the self-determination bullshit. And I'm like, hey, let me take that apart for you just a little bit. White guy who wants to self-determine because he's 6'3" and weighs 240 and can carry a gun and survive. And just the fact that they've never thought that self-determinism and individualism could potentially be a problem. They've got none of that. None of the alternative stuff creeping in that just gives them a little bit of, slows them down just a little bit on that thought train.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's good work. That's important.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy it. I usually keep it fun, because I don't like arguing with that ilk. Like, there's no profit in it. It's like you said, what's the profit in it for me? I need to enjoy it. So, well, I've kept you a long time. I really appreciate this. You're great.
Oh, thank you. You're great.
You're awesome to talk to. You know your stuff. Maybe we can circle back around at some point. I would love to help promote your book. Anything we can do.
Thank you. I would enjoy that. Yeah, I would enjoy chatting.
Okay. And where can people find you if they want your stuff?
My books are sold wherever books are sold. I'm on Twitter. I write in public. I make jokes. They're not funny, or they are, maybe.
I'm not sure they're funny. I'm sure they have funny potential.
Potential. I got potential.
Yeah. Well, I will put your stuff up on the site, and everybody go check out Jennifer Mare-chia. And I appreciate it again very much. Enjoy College Station. I'll enjoy Austin. Off we'll go. Hey, this has been the Rhetoric Warriors podcast. Get out there and persuade some people, because, as always, they probably need it.